All right, so 28-25, the Bills pull out a dramatic win over the Detroit Lions on this Thanksgiving holiday here at Ford Field in Detroit. I am Adam Benigni, Vic Carucci back in Buffalo in the studio. And Vic, you think about this game, and look, the Bills have faced some adversity, a lot of it. They've struggled for significant portions over the past several games. We have talked about that. That was also the case here in this one. But I think back, great players deliver in the clutch. We saw that in this game. And I think back to some of the great teams, the Patriots, for example, in their heyday with Tom Brady when he was there. They would have days like this. They would find a way to win ugly games with Brady working his magic toward the end of it. And I think that's kind of a shade of what we saw here today with how they were able to pull this thing out. The bottom line is they come away with a W.
Yeah, I think when the Bills look back on this season, and they hope they're looking back on it with a very deep playoff run or going all the way to and winning the Super Bowl. But whenever the season ends, you're going to look back at this 2-week stretch or this compressed few days apart where they, of course, played in Detroit to beat the Browns and had to overcome so much just to get to the game from Buffalo because of the snowstorm and all that went with that. And then returning there for a game like this, for a game that I think reflected in some ways a team not ready to play. I thought it would be much easier against an opponent that was inferior in so many ways, especially on defense. And the struggles of the Bills' offense that we saw and that were familiar, and another red zone interception for Josh Allen. Things that are head scratchers and troubling, and he wasn't the only one struggling there too. I mean, with his off-target throws, some cases receivers were just dropping passes or there was miscommunication, but they did pull it together. That is the most important thing, and the good teams do that. And pulling it together as he did in the most clutch situation the last 2+ minutes really does make a statement.
I think that there's no question in my mind, Vic, that Allen is still trying to find his game. In the end, when the game's on the line, it's no surprise that he hooks up with Stefon Diggs for a couple of big plays, and that's really how the pendulum sort of swung in their favor. But to what degree? I think we got to talk about injuries. I don't want to make excuses for them, but when you're playing without your starting center in Mitch Morse to begin with, and then you lose your left tackle in Dion Dawkins during the course of the game, that has a very significant impact. I mean, you could see how Detroit was able to turn up the pressure and disrupt things and get to Allen and really alter the tempo of what the Bills were trying to do offensively.
No question, Allen rarely looked comfortable back in the pocket. I mean, he either was on the move, not finding open people. And that's the other thing about the pressure. Some of it was, yes, guys getting beat up front. But honestly, Adam, there were circumstances where it looked like coverage was causing him to hold the ball. And then, of course, Ken Dorsey is calling multiple design runs. Once again, the Bills' running game reverts back to Allen being their best runner after what we saw against Cleveland, where you had Devin Singletary and James Cook each getting 86 yards. This was a day where the only back who was productive on the ground was Singletary, and that was for 72 yards. So you didn't see that level of balance between running backs and a passing game that you saw a week ago. And I think that contributed to the problems, along with, again, those injuries. But, yeah, and add to it, when Allen is off target and having his problems, what happens during the broadcast? Jim Nantz and Tony Romo, for a couple, I mean, I'm sure others were doing this, start speculating about whether that elbow injury that he suffered against the Jets, that Allen suffered against the Jets, is continuing to give him a problem. And their sideline reporter talked about how he was throwing on the sidelines to kind of keep the arm loose. So all of that conversation still seems to linger.
Allen, I'm glad you brought that up, Vic, because Allen was asked directly about it after the game, and he just kind of smiled. He didn't say that the elbow wasn't bothering him. He just kind of said, listen, if any player around the league tells you they're at 100%, at this point in the season, they're lying to you. That was his way of answering that question. And so it's a factor, I think, to keep in mind. I did ask him if he was okay that he took a shot toward the end of the game. The knee and the glute, he said he's fine, that won't pose a problem moving forward. I want to switch gears now and talk about the defensive side of the ball, what they were able to accomplish. And we talked about elite players stepping up, not just with the game on the line in terms of Ed Oliver. He had a career game, former first-round pick, right? The defensive tackle. We talked about the injuries on that side of the ball. He was virtually unstoppable. I thought it was the best I've seen him play during his time in the NFL.
Ed Oliver's game was massive, and he was already on his way to having a big game before Von Miller was lost late in the first half. I know we're going to get into that, but before, one of your top defensive members, one of your top members of that defensive front leaves the field, Oliver was having a day. And every possible way, the sack for a safety and then forcing a fumble, recovering a fumble, just the tackles for loss and covering not just the ground between him and the backfield, but from side to side, the pursuit, his quickness, his strength, which is deceptive because he's not the biggest of guys. Now, let's also note that the Lions were playing without their two starting offensive guards, so that's a factor too. But when a better player or a top-level player has his way with whoever's backing up, that says more about the bigger and better guy or the bigger performance than it really does against the circumstances, because with injuries and so forth, it's going to change from week to week who you're facing and talent level. But I give a lot of credit to Ed Oliver. He really showed how much this team should value his presence for the long haul.
There, of course, is the question, and you alluded to this, victory at what cost? And look, the elephant in the room as we have this discussion, albeit after a victory, is what's the deal with Von Miller? We saw his leg kind of twist on the rush at that particular time. It looked like an ankle injury. It was reported by the Bills as a knee injury, and the report from Ian Rappaport of NFL Network, I think, was first to come out with the fact that they think it's a sprained knee at this point, but going to be more tests, MRI, right? All of that diagnostic stuff to see if it potentially would be more severe. But so it sounds like he's going to miss some time, right? And I guess my question to you is, without Sean McDermott really being able to provide any type of update, we asked him, of course, after the game, is what's the real impact in terms of the X's and O's on the field? Because we've heard Leslie Frazier, the defensive coordinator, talk about the fact that the presence of Miller, that signing, is so vital to the Bills being able to get pressure really primarily with 4, right? Sometimes even 3, and in that sense be able to truly dictate what they want to do and what they want to commit to the pass rush, and by extension then leave and support in the secondary. What they're able to do, they can dictate against other teams when Miller is in there and healthy versus having to react to what other teams are trying to do offensively. So you take Miller out there, how does that change the dynamic on that side of the ball for Buffalo heading down the stretch here?
Yeah, and look, the investment alone said it all about what the Bills believed Von Miller was going to mean to this team and how they were approaching this season after another bitter playoff loss at Kansas City, that the antidote would be this guy, the closer, the guy who could get Patrick Mahomes, if not on the ground, certainly disrupt him enough. All of that centered around what they were pursuing with Von Miller and what they paid him, including $51+ million of guaranteed money in this 6-year deal over these 2 years. So to only get what might be a half a year out of him, potentially, if depending on how bad this thing is. And look, one of the things that troubled me, or certainly concerned me, was how quickly it was declared that he was going to miss the rest of the game. He was out for the game with this knee injury. I mean, that caused a lot of conclusion that, oh, okay, this might not be too good. Now, a sprained knee, by definition, if that's what it is, still references a tear of ligaments, partially at least. We'll see how bad that is and how quick he can heal. 33 years old, so you wonder about that as well, how much wear and tear his body has taken. And then you take him out of there for any length of time, I think this pass rush suffers heavily, because you won't have that. Not only won't you have Miller's presence in that, but you also won't have the impact of other players, Greg Rousseau, who is also hurt, or A.J. Epinesa, even Oliver, Jordan Phillips. Everybody benefits from his presence out there, from having Von Miller on that field, because he commands that extra blocking attention.
All right, so we hope to have some type of an update on that over the next couple of days as the Bills come out of this win at 8-3. Want to go back to the start of the game when the inactives came out, and everyone immediately looked at the fact like, wow, Tre'Davious White for the first time in a year is actually going to see action in an NFL game. He, of course, suffered the torn ACL at New Orleans a year ago on Thanksgiving in that win over the Saints, and has really taken his time to come back and only played for a couple of series. And we asked Sean McDermott about that, and he's like, that was by design. White in no way suffered any type of setback out here in the action that he did see, but they just wanted to give him a feel for game action as they head down the stretch here and look toward the postseason to try to get him back full and healthy. I guess your sense of how they're handling this and where this tells you White might be in terms of that knee recovery.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they only wanted to just put him out there for a couple of series almost begs the question of why bother, but you know, you've got practices, I guess. Don't you have chances to have him run around? But I don't know, to see him on the field in a game like, or a game setting, not game like, it was a game, and to see how he held up, it just was strange, because that's every down matters, right? Every snap matters, and if he's not full ready to go, why put him out there? The rule of thumb, as I've always understood it in football and of course other sports, is you put a guy out on the field to play, means he's ready to play. Putting him on a 2-series pitch count seems odd to me, and the whole thing still seems kind of odd. 364 days have gone by since he suffered that injury in New Orleans, also, you know, on Thanksgiving night, and then comes back to have a couple of series. Look, their depth is showing problems within that depth, or the weakness of it starting to show up at corner, and I think Dane Jackson is moving to the point where teams just can pick on him, and so it leads to the question of just how well this secondary can hold up, minus Micah Hyde, and continuing to be minus perhaps Tre'Davious White.
Here's my sense on the whole thing. I think this whole delay has been entirely about Trey White and his confidence. You know, if they're telling him medically or whatever, I mean, I think if he was even out there on the field today, medically, he should be fine. For whatever reason, we've talked about this on Sports Talk Live, it can be up to 2 years, specialists will tell you that, before an athlete really feels themselves on the field as they recover from this type of an injury. And I just get the sense that White has lacked confidence. I think he wanted to go out and give it an in-game sort of test spin over 2 series. That's my sense of where this is at, and we'll see how I asked McDermott, I said, did you get any feedback from him on maybe how he felt? And obviously there's a lot going on for the head coach in the course of a game, and he said they would talk about that and maybe gauge that over the next couple of days. So that's where things stand. One final point before we wrap this up. So the Bills are 8-3 now, and that's impressive, but they're 0-2 in the AFC East. And now begins a stretch. Now's when it gets real in terms of the division race, right? You know, next Thursday night, they're on the road in Foxborough. It's the first of 3 straight against division teams. 4 of their last 6 games were against the AFC East. So the division hangs in the balance here, and there are still some very legitimate questions about the overall performance of this Buffalo Bills football team, and obviously its health as well.
Yeah, for sure. And look, they have to get their act together. I mean, it sounds trite, but it isn't. They have to play complete games. They're not going to get away with games where they find a way to win, even when they're playing poorly, even when you have Josh Allen struggling for whatever reason he's struggling. And if health is part of that, then that is a concern as you get down the stretch, because as Allen pointed out, everybody at this time of year is in that boat. But this is their franchise quarterback. This is the guy they've got to rely on. And then the other injuries that have accumulated, remember, the Bills had been quite fortunate, I think, through most of their strongest run here from 2020 till now to avoid injuries, right? They've been pretty lucky in that regard. And now they're hitting some key players. And we'll see about Von Miller. We'll see about Deion Dawkins. We'll see about, Mitch Morse and others. And of course, if the quarterback is pushing his way through but struggling at times, possibly because of that elbow, that's something to look at. They can't afford to trip up in any of these coming games, period, but especially the ones in their division.
All right, Vic Carucci, thank you very much. We hope you've enjoyed this extended post-game edition, Sports Talk Live online, if you will, after the Bills' 28-25 Thanksgiving Day win over the Detroit Lions here at Ford Field in Detroit. For Vic Carucci in Buffalo, this is Adam Benigni, Channel 2 Sports.